الحمد لله نستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله ونشهد أن سيدنا مولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله تعالى آله وأصحابه وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to our COVID-19 webinar series. And this particular session, which is quite an important session, is on the subject of easing lockdown, specifically in relation to our Masajid, and generally speaking in some of the other Islamic institutes within our communities. Now, alhamdulillah, we've got a panelist, a set of panel people that we've invited to bring some value into some of our conversations. Now, before I begin, I just want to mention one or two things. The first thing is in terms of the confusion that seems to be arising at the moment in terms of the current state of our Masajid, in terms of whether they should be open, whether they should remain closed. Now, there are clearly some guidelines that are out there, very brief, overarching type guidelines, quite broad, nothing very specific, more so for the UK I'm talking about, but generally speaking, even amongst the countries around the world, even amongst the Muslim countries, you'll find that there is some either brevity or there is some ambiguity in some of the messages that are actually going out there in terms of how soon we can start opening up our Masajid to the wider public. So this session, in essence, will be focusing mainly on this particular issue. We will be addressing some of those elements of confusion and ambiguity, and hopefully, inshallah, go into some detail. And the second point that I wanted to mention was that the format of today's session will be such that we'll have approximately 45 minutes in which there will be a kind of a discussion, more like a kind of a meeting setup. So kind of a discussion with people who have got some expertise, and draw up a kind of a plan in terms of the milestones that we should really be considering in the process of opening up our Masajid to the wider public. Now, we will discuss that, and this is going to be minuted as well. So there is somebody who's going to be making notes so that this can also be distributed to people who have an interest in this particular area. Now, I know and I recognize there are many people who are coming online from not just from the UK, from abroad, and clearly some of the instructions that are being dissipated in different countries abroad are quite different to the ones that are related to UK. Having said that, majority of the people here are from the UK. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to probably mention more things in relation to the current sort of guidelines that are out there in the UK, and I'm sure that will have some kind of benefit for those of us who are also abroad. So please, if I do start talking specifically about the UK, I'm doing it with that intention, with that particular reason, and also I'm sure it will be of benefit to you if you are from a different country. Now, there's some very important things that we'll be talking about. We'll be talking about mainly the Shariah concepts related to opening our Masajid, what is permissible, what is not permissible, what can be done, what cannot be done. We will also be talking about the practical aspects in terms of how feasible it is for us to do these things with the current climate, and how we should take on some of these generalized guidelines, and to address some of the elements of confusion that also exist within this particular discussion. So I won't go any further except just start first introducing our panelists, bearing in mind that we have, I think Dr. Munir is not actually here yet, but hopefully, inshallah, he'll be here shortly. Now, so I'll start off first with Mufti Zubair, and you're all familiar with Mufti Zubair, but he's been participating in many of our webinars, especially in relation to COVID-19. So Mufti Zubair doesn't need any further introduction other than the fact that he represents a number of different organizations in essence, but his main area is usually Islamic finance as well as Islamic medical fiqh. But he has also been involved in quite a few issues in relation to the situation with the Masajid during COVID-19. So he's very aware of current government guidelines and also how we could use them to address some of our concerns. Another very important person we have today is Mohammed Kozbar. Kozbar, and he is somebody who is a representative from MCB, who's going to be, in essence, talking to us about a number of different things in relation to what MCB are currently doing. And also his other positions, in essence, relate to his role as being the chair of Finsbury Park Masjid. So clearly he has a good understanding of the practical implications of some of these guidelines, and he can give us a very good understanding about the details related to what can be done and what is feasible in us doing these things in a masjid. Now, before I go further, we'll be waiting on Dr. Munir, but if he doesn't arise, then inshallah we'll try to continue without that. So let's first begin. And what I'm going to do initially is, there's a couple of things that we need to talk about. We need to realize that there's something about the science behind this. So that's something that we'll get Dr. Munir to address when he's here. But at the present moment, there are certain things that we have in terms of guidelines that are out there. They're not necessarily guidelines that are mainly from the UK, but I've looked at a number of different guidelines, not just from the UK, from Canada, from America, and also from some of the other Muslim countries. And what I've drawn up is a general outline of some of the things that seem to be recurring as regular themes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through these general guidelines. And when I do this, I would like our panelists to actually have a look at them and give us some feedback on their thoughts on these particular guidelines. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend approximately 45 minutes just talking about this amongst our panel. And then inshallah we will open questions to the audience, and inshallah if there's anything that you guys want to ask more specifically, then hopefully inshallah we can address them as well. Now in the UK, our Prime Minister talks about 5 tests, and let me emphasize these 5 tests and the importance of these 5 tests. These 5 tests are tests that are out there in essence to give us some kind of measure in terms of how we are doing. So if we are passing these 5 tests, then that generally means that we can move to the next milestone or the next step in terms of opening up some of our other services. So on that basis, these 5 tests, and I think in essence they're quite useful to know because they do apply to the other countries as well, even though they have not been presented in this particular way. So there's something about the capacity to cope in our hospitals, so the NHS in the UK. So the first is there evidence that the NHS is coping across the UK? So when you look at the UK more specifically, we have the NHS here. So from that perspective, are we finding that the intensive care units are coping quite well? Are we dealing with the situation of beds in some of those hospitals? And if you look at it from the perspective abroad, the same thing applies there as well. Now, clearly, if we are seeing that the capacity is there, then that would suggest that we can move on to the next stage. The next point is there a sustained fall in the daily death rate? So are we seeing that the daily death rates are falling? So on that basis, we can then therefore recognize that when the daily death rates are falling, that's some kind of indication to us that the threat is no longer as severe as it was. So we can start looking at other ways of opening some of our masajid, for example. The third is evidence that the rate of infection is decreasing. So this is something which we will address to Dr. Munir if he does arise, and that is what we call the R numbers. So the question that arises here is there any evidence that the rate of transmission is actually falling? So in other words, for every one individual who is infected, are many more getting infected, or is that less? So is it exponentially increasing or is it decreasing? The fourth is the confidence that supplies of testing and PPI are able to meet demand. So this is about resource, other than the resource that is found in the hospitals, but other resources such as PPI protection. Are these means available? Are they easily available? And if they are, then we can be confident that we don't need to be concerned or be threatened by them, and hence this could escalate if they are not. And then finally, is there a risk of a second peak? So this takes into consideration a number of different parameters in terms of how we decide whether there's going to be a second peak in terms of the transmission rate, and also recognizing that different localities, or even within the same country, there are different rates of transmission relative to other regions, and similarly in other countries as well. Now, having said this, these are the 5 main things that the UK sort of government is really looking at in addressing the issue of whether we should start opening up some of our other services and in essence, mitigating those risks. Now, on the basis of this, this is a chart, okay, and the idea is for it not to be too heavy, but here you can see there are a couple of considerations that many of the guidelines out there, more specifically aimed at our masajid, are presenting to us, okay? So one of them is, should you consider opening? And there are a couple of things that we need to think about in terms of whether we should be opening. So the question arises, will reopening be consistent with applicable state, government and local orders, consensus of ulama? So the question arises, what is the consensus of the ulama? What do the ulama say in terms of when is the right time to open the masajid? Should we be opening them immediately? Should we be waiting? What does the Islamic tradition inform us regarding how we should behave in these circumstances? Now, we already talked about the issue about keeping our masajid open or restricting the numbers. So this is something that we'll be talking about in a short while. We've got Mufti Zubair here, so we'll be discussing that with him. The other is, are you ready to protect staff and worshippers at high risk for severe illness? So this is a kind of a risk analysis that you're doing in terms of, are you ready to now open up your masajid? And if you are going to open up your masajid, are you going to strictly adhere to strict guidelines to ensure that we do not harm individuals on the basis of transmission of infection? And do you have what we call safety monitors? And safety monitors are individuals who have been assigned a role, who just keep a monitor on things, on people, to make sure people are following these particular guidelines. Now, I'm not going to move on further than this, other than present some questions. So let me start off first with Mufti Zubair on this issue. Now, in terms of, do we have any Shariah restrictions? It's a very broad question, but we'll go into the detail in a short while. But are there any Shariah restrictions when we start opening our masajid? Like, for example, let me start with one particular question I'll put to you. Can we actually prevent, if our masajid are open, can we actually prevent people from coming to our masajid?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyid al-Rusul wa Khatamin Nabiyyin. Muhammadin wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin, amma ba'd. First of all, I'd like to thank Al-Balagh Academy for inviting me to share some of my thoughts. I hope and pray that this session, inshallah, will be useful. On the question specifically posed by yourself as to whether we can restrict the access to the masjid for the public. I think if we just go back and currently the masajid are closed, and if we just go back and just ask the question of ourselves, why did we actually suspend the congregational prayers in the masjid? Why was that decision actually taken? And in fact, the majority of the masajid took this decision even before lockdown on the 23rd of March. Even before the government announced lockdown on the 23rd of March, the scholars and the masajid took the decision to close the masajid. For example, in Bradford, where I am from, on the 18th of March, we held a meeting in Bradford as Bradford Council for Mosques, and we presented the reasons why we considered that we need to be suspending congregational prayers in the masajid. Now, for me, that was one of the most difficult decisions in my life, and something I had to present and basically present myself as a sacrificial lamb, because that was very new at the time. Then 3 days later, on the 21st of March, scholars got together in Blackburn and concluded that we would advise the masajid that to close. And this was even before lockdown, which happened a further 2 days later, announced by Boris Johnson. So why did we actually even close? And the debate continues across the world, not just in the UK, across the world, as to whether it is correct to actually even close the masjid at all and suspend congregational prayers at all. And some governments, some countries, some scholars have taken a position, yes, that the protection of life, the protection of the health of individuals supersedes all things, other things. Congregational prayer or prayer itself can be performed at home, and so the hifz al-nafs the protection of life, that supersedes everything. Whilst in other countries there has been a lot of pushback from the ulama, and some even going on to say that is impermissible for us to close our masajid in prayer, and we don't have any precedent of this in the examples of the Sahaba. In fact, they continued their prayer, etc., etc. However, my personal position was that if the very reason for, or the very way that the virus spreads is that we get together and come together, and that is how it actually spreads, and that is what we need to restrict. And so, even if we didn't have a precedent in the past, or even if they understood that this was not an action that they would take, it doesn't preclude us from taking that particular action. And so, I was of that opinion. But despite what happened was, because Boris Johnson announced in this country, Boris Johnson and other countries' governments had closed public spaces, places of worship. That discussion becomes a bit academic for the time being, because obeying the command of the ruler is also an obligation, and in something as, if it's done vindictively, then it's something that we can protest and we can oppose. But if it is done for our benefit, for the purpose of our health, then that is something we should adhere to. And we have verses of the Holy Quran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ati'u Allaha wa ati'u Rasulahu wa ulil amri minkum, in which we are instructed to follow those charged with authority over us, and even that if that person is non-Muslim. And so therefore, that became an obligation for us to do. Now, looking ahead, it is quite likely that soon, possibly in early July, the masajid will be allowed to open. And then there will be a discussion of actually whether we should actually open. Just because the government says that it is okay to open and places of worship can be opened, I think masajid need to have their own risk assessment, need to be careful themselves, and say, is it actually safe to open? But just assuming that with the masajid that are open, the question as to whether we are able to restrict individuals from coming to the masjid. Okay. I think you have a number of categories there. Before I go into that, it is the job of the government, it is the job of the legislature, the judiciary, and the police to enact and enforce laws. It is not the job of private citizens to enforce laws. Okay, and so anything that restricts a person's autonomy is not something that a private individuals can do. However, if a person's by exercising their personal autonomy brings harm to another, then that is somewhere where even private individuals Islamically can exercise some restraint. So, for example, you have someone coming to the masjid who is in the at-risk category. Either they have they're above 70, for example, they're ill health. They have ill health, they have comorbidities which put them at risk. Can the masjid itself restrict that individual from coming to the masjid and say, Haji Sahib, I'm sorry, but you can't come to the masjid? My personal opinion would be, because that does not impact on the health of another, it would not be right for the masjid committee to sort of limit the freedom of that individual to come to the masjid. So it wouldn't be something that we could stop them from coming. On the other hand, you have someone who is ill with COVID-19 and wants to come to the masjid, or who the government have instructed that they should be isolating themselves for 14 days, or who comes to the masjid and which it will not be unusual to see, refuses to, for example, take precautionary measures and puts the life and health of others at risk. Here, where we see this in the Islamic law, is the Sharia tends to exercise limits on freedom, mainly where the rights of others are impinged upon, where there is the preservation of public interest, and, for example, in the prevention of contagious disease. This is where the freedom of movement, freedom of a person's liberty is actually exercised. So where that affects the safety affects the health of a third party, then the masjid committee can exercise, their powers and have possibly a duty to do so, and restrict the access of individuals like that. So you have, so in sort of in short, where you restrict the right of the individual or the freedom of the individual related specifically to themselves, I don't think the private individuals have the right to do that. But where it affects others and it puts the life and health of others at risk, the masjid committee not only has a right but has a duty to do that.
Now, I've deliberately let Mufti Zubair talk about this in quite a bit of detail and explain the details behind it, because this is a very, very important issue. The first, I'm just going to summarize what Mufti Zubair has basically said. The first issue is that by default, we have been told to seriously limit the number of people in our masajid, even to about 2 to 3, even to that degree, or close our masajid in some instances, on the basis of the fact that there is a clear threat there. Now, this threat is very real, and we are already seeing the implications of the threat in terms of the number of deaths that are occurring, which are clearly related to COVID-19. Now, we could question those figures, which clearly we can, and there is some element of ambiguity in those figures, but the reality is that we are seeing an increased number of deaths on the basis of COVID-19, and it's related to that. Now, so on that basis, the question that arose, and this is the Shariah sort of perspective to this, can we, if we are going to employ certain conditions, number one, for our staff and also for the worshippers who attend our masajid, can we employ these restrictions to the degree that we can actually prevent people from coming to the masjid? Now, how we do that is a separate question, and we're going to talk to Mohammed Kozbar about this in a short while. But generally speaking, from the Shariah perspective, is it permissible for us to prevent people coming to the masjid? And Mufti Zubair has quite clearly explained that if that individual is a threat to others, so if there is darar to or harm to the other worshippers in the masjid, then on that basis, then there is that element of permissibility that we can prevent those individuals from attending the masjid. As opposed to when that person is not a threat to others, but rather a threat to himself or herself, then on that basis, then that element of restriction and prevention does not allow us that element of freedom to be able to do that to those individuals. In other words, we would have problems preventing those individuals from coming to the masjid if it's just solely a threat to them. Now, this can be a very ambiguous sort of issue again, because the question arises, when do you decide that somebody is a threat to others, and when do you decide that somebody is not a threat to others, or just a threat to themselves? So on that basis, do we have certain tests that we can do? How practical is that? How feasible is that? Mohammed Kozbar, what are your thoughts on this issue in terms of preventing people from coming to the masajid? Let's say our masajid are opening with limited numbers to the public. How feasible is that for somebody who in essence chairs a committee in a masjid? How feasible is something like that with the kind of community that we have?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wassalamu ala Rasulullah. First, thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar. And I have to say first that we all agree that we live in unprecedented time and periods, which requires from us probably unprecedented actions and decisions. Mosques before coronavirus will not be the same as after coronavirus. We all know that, and we've seen that by closing our mosques, which never happened in history. And I have to first start with praising our mosques and our centers for following the rules. Actually, they closed their doors before even the government asked us to close. And this is something which we should be proud of as a community, as mosques. Of course, there is exceptional. We all know that there is exceptional in every community, not just only the Muslim community, but in general, we follow the rules, we stick with that rules, and alhamdulillah, we still sticking with that rules even when the government announced that probably 4th of July, the mosque or the places of worship will be open soon, and we all desperate for that date, inshallah ta'ala, if nothing happened, if the plan go as it is. So it is a difficult time, no doubt about that. Therefore, MCB has been consulting and working with others. We've been busy as other national organizations preparing for that. And we've been consulting with our affiliates, our mosques, and of course, other mosques across the country who are not affiliated to MCB, because this is something which is, we are talking here about unity, we are talking here about leadership, and we should, our community, the Muslim community, deserve from us all, Muslim organizations, to show this unity and leadership. And therefore, many things happening during that period, from providing guidance to mosque, general guidance. Of course, every mosque has got their own circumstances which they have to deal with as well, but in general we have to have some sort of general guidance to our mosques, preparing online training, for example, on how to deal with the issue, and so on. In terms of preventing people from attending the mosques, well, this is the difficult decision which sometimes the management of the mosque has to take. If that individual pose risk on others and affect other people and other congregations' life and health. Therefore, it's not easy, as you said, it's not easy to say that what is the criteria for that, how are we going to deal with it. I think this is why we should, as a community, start this conversation and start these discussions. Actually, there's three elements which we need to look at. The first of all, the government and the local government's element. Secondly, the medics, the Muslim medics experts, and thirdly, the scholars, our ulama view and their opinion on these issues. These three elements is very essential and very important to look at, because they will give us the guidance in terms, the medics will give us the guidance on how to deal with such individuals if this happening in our mosques. And to be honest with you, I am the chair of the mosque, and I know how difficult this would be, and how much the mosque will struggle to deal with this matter, and it will cause a lot of issues inside the mosque and outside the mosque, because unfortunately some people might make an issue or a story out of it and put it outside. And we've seen that before. We've seen that experience, unfortunately. And this might cause us even not just a problem within the mosque, even outside within the society. And we know the far rights, for example, are waiting to see such videos, for example, and such things, going out to say that the Muslims are fighting each other, or the Muslims are spreading the virus, and so on. So we need to be very, very, very careful on dealing with these matters. And I'm sure mosques will take this into consideration. We still have about 5 weeks to open the mosque if the plan go as it stands at the moment.
Add to that, Mohammed, in the sense that for somebody who's from a medical background, and also somebody who's been dealing with people, especially my own staff, recognizing that they've been clearly been told, because a lot of our health sort of institutes are open, so our GP surgeries, for example, they are open. So here we have members of our staff who have been clearly informed that if you have any symptoms suggestive of COVID-19, then you should not attend work, but rather you should contact us and let us know. Now, that's caused a lot of problems for many of my staff members, in the sense that you'll get some of them who have a bit of a cough, or some who have a slight fever, or they're not sure. So there's a lot of ambiguity in terms of knowing whether you actually have the symptoms or not. So it's not even clear whether you have those symptoms. And there are some symptoms that have been identified. You've got a cough, you've got a temperature, you're feeling a bit short of breath. The reality is symptoms don't arise in textbook style. They can be very varied. Some people are not able to detect whether they have them. There have been places other than sort of health institutes. One way they've been dealing with this issue is they've actually been using means of measuring people's temperature. So if somebody's temperature is high, then that would suggest that that person is basically could potentially present some risk to others. And by default, we should assume that they have COVID-19, even though they may not. Now, how feasible is implementing such programs in a masjid where, you know, you're measuring people's temperatures at the door? You know, how possible is that? How feasible? Only you can answer us in terms of, you know, how feasible that is. So this thing about, you know, preventing only those individuals who are unwell, who have these symptoms, I think that can be very problematic. It can be very difficult to be able to recognize which individuals have got those symptoms and which ones don't. So that's the first problem. And I think many of us will understand that point. Let's just move on because we're very limited. And I really want to open this out to the audience as well. Now, before I go on there, I'm just going to go into this a bit more detail because this is quite important. So what I've done is I've formulated this slide here. What this slide is in essence telling us is that will reopening be consistent with applicable state, government and local orders and consensus of ulama? So at the moment, we've got some kind of idea in the UK, and it varies in different places around the world, in terms of the government may allow us to open up our masajid to the public round about maybe early July, or even earlier, maybe, but with certain restrictions and certain limitations. So the question arises, how do we react to that? So the first thing is, we don't go, you know, head first and start opening up our masajid, just, you know, taking no consideration of the limitations and the restrictions, because what we're doing, we're placing our worshippers in a serious amount of risk. So on that basis, the question arises, how do we deal with this issue? Now, first of all, like Mohammed Kozbar has mentioned, that we need to engage with people who have medical knowledge. We need to engage with our local, you know, government or our local council. And we also need to engage with our local ulama and also the national ulama and get some kind of consensus when they feel how we can deal with this issue. So the ulama will give us some Shariah perspectives to this, but the practical aspect of this, you know, it's something that can be quite difficult. So the chances are, when we open our masajid, it will be limited to so many people who can attend. So even then, the question arises, and this goes back to the question about limitations to the number of people who can attend the masjid. So especially when we're talking about social distancing within the masjid, so you know, in terms of the number of people that are in the masjid are limited on the basis of the space available that you can read in. So in this sense, going back to Mufti Zubair, social distancing in a masjid. So the question arises, how can we do that? How can we, would it be permissible for us to have a saf where we have, you know, 6 feet distance between each muqtadi? And also, if that is not possible, can we, if the government is telling us we can limit our masjid only to so many number of people, how do we deal with that? Is that something that we can work with?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. When we closed our masajid or suspended congregation prayers in our masajid in late March, that was a massive decision, probably the most difficult decisions of our lives in relation to our masajid. My personal opinion on this is to reopen the masajid is going to be a much more difficult decision than actually closing the masajid.
Completely agree.
Yeah, and the reason is you can have policy and principle on paper, but to implement that in practice is another thing altogether. When you talk about social distancing, I work in a hospital, and I'm sure this is mirrored up and down the country in GP surgeries everywhere within the NHS. You have policies, and then you have practice, and the practice doesn't always meet up with the policy. The social distancing element is actually quite difficult to do. And here I'm thinking of professional environments where people are used to following laws. There are certain policies and procedures that they are trained on. Every year they have to do certain training on, for example, infection control, etc., etc. And there you find even medical professionals are not really maintaining social distancing or not able to maintain social distancing. So in a local masjid where you have members of the community from all walks of life, not medically trained, may not be aware of the full, enormity of the situation. You have varying degrees of knowledge, and to get them to follow the guidelines as written on paper is going to be practically impossible. Okay, there are some things you are going to be able to control, and some things you will not be able to control. For example, you may be able to mark out, on the carpet, crosses or whatever, to say that you will stand at such a distance. But when you enter the masjid and leave the masjid, when you are after salah, when people are intermingling, because what I am witnessing now is people have fatigue across the board, not just Muslims, non-Muslims, in all walks of life. And the initial early 3-4 weeks of this COVID-19 lockdown, the then practice seemed to have disappeared, and people are now shaking hands and hugging again. And you tend to be the odd one out when you don't shake hands. It's been expected how people are shaking hands, and it's become very difficult. These same people will be coming to the masjid. How we control that, I am not sure. Okay, it's not part. When you go to the supermarket, what happens? You queue up outside in 2 meters, and when you're inside, there's no 2 meter distancing, unless you are queuing up again.
But these things have been discussed, haven't they? I mean, even for example, let's take Pakistan for example. There, some of our most senior ulama have clearly outlined that we can mitigate the circumstances here, and this is the plan. So this is the plan. The idea is that we distance ourselves in the masjid, even amongst the saf. So this is ways of mitigating it. So the point that you're raising, and I'm sure many people would agree with you, is there's something about this is the mitigation plan, but are people actually following that? And you'll see pictures, you'll see pictures and small videos in social media of Masajid where these plans are being presented, and clearly you're seeing muqtadis, worshippers, spaced out in a prayer area. And reality is, that is the situation while the Jamaat is going on. But as soon as the Jamaat is finished, or where can all Masajid employ those plans strictly? And this is a real question, isn't it? Because there's something about mitigating plans, but there's something about, can we afford that risk? Can we afford to take on that risk? And this is the point that you're raising, isn't it? In terms of the fact that reality is on the ground that people are not going to follow those plans, and there's a good chance they probably won't.
What I would say is we should not be singling out Masajid for exemplary kind of conduct that is not being mirrored anywhere else.
It's happening everywhere.
That's what my point would be. Okay, yes, it's not going to be perfect, but it's not perfect anywhere. So there's going to be a level of tolerance that you will need, and this is going to be there's going to be a mosaic across the whole of the UK. Different Masajid. We're not all the same. We're different. The understanding of this is different. Our communities are different. Adherence, our Masajid are different. Our facilities are different. So it's going to be a very, very mixed picture. And I personally, I think it's only by talking about the issues, raising the issue, getting the Masajid prepared as much as can be done, giving them the confidence to be able to communicate that to their congregants and try to not enforce but and keep encouraging. But even the government isn't really enforcing, except where the police, stop people in small.
Can I put a question to you? Because at the end of the day, we're looking for solutions here as well. So let's say, for example, we've been given limitations in terms of the number of people that we can have in a masjid on the basis of mitigation. Okay, so let's say, for example, some of our Masajid are quite confident that they feel that they can open a masjid and they can have a small congregation. And they can only manage a small congregation. And they have decided that they will be individuals that they will choose and decide who can come to the masjid. So let's say, for example, there's a masjid that I'm involved within, and we've decided that we will allow 50 people to read in the masjid. We've set out the flooring in such a way, we put tape on the floor so that everybody knows where they need to be. And we're only allowing those individuals into the masjid who we know are clearly going to follow these guidelines. Their time in the masjid will be limited. And you've seen some of those guidelines written by ulama in terms of, if it's a Jummah khutbah, that's limited. They only come and read the fara'id. They don't use the wudu facility. They come in, use sanitizer, wear a mask even, and they come into the masjid. And they have these mitigation sort of situations out there. Now, in that sense, from an Islamic perspective, can we limit the number of worshippers and identify them and say only you people can come to the masjid? I know you mentioned some earlier on that you can't prevent somebody coming from the masjid, but this is now more actively saying that only you are invited. So in essence, the masjid is closed to the public, but only these individuals are able to come to the masjid because we can trust their, the fact that they will stick to these guidelines. Is that a possible way of dealing with the situation, or is that something that, even from an Islamic perspective, it doesn't really stand?
Personally, I think that is
fraught, solutions here, don't we?
Yeah, personally, I think that is fraught with so many ethical issues. How do you decide somebody will or won't follow the rules? Okay, I hear of a masjid which has said that only those people that are paying members will be able to attend the masjid. Personally, I don't think either of these things is permissible in law. What you will have to do is, you may say, okay, manage the attendance at the masjid. For example, if you're saying 50 people, that for Zuhr Salah, we will have 3, 4, 5 Zuhr Salahs. We will have them at these intervals, etc. So that is what you'll have to manage. And maybe Islamically, when you have say a limited number of availability and more than the availability people are asking to use that, then you can either do it on a first come first served basis, or you do it by drawing lots, etc. I would suggest possibly is for example, Jummah Salah, that you book onto Jummah Salah or something like this, where you can cater for the community, not just only 50 members, select members, but the community as a whole, but stagger the prayers and do that as much as possible.
So what you're saying is you can't actually identify individuals and say that this is the person who can come to the masjid because I trust that this person will follow the guidelines. You can't do that, even in the issue of mitigating risk. Because if you open this up to anybody, then
I mean, what measure do you have? What measure do you have for that? I mean, it's so subjective that it's it's impossible. When it becomes so subjective, it's impossible to implement as something that is that is mandatory. That is something that is.
Well, chances are it's probably going to be quite biased, and the kind of people who are going to be attending the masjid in that case would be either members of family members of the committee, or people who know the committee quite well,
or those that make the least noise, or those that cause the least trouble. So that's why for me all these considerations are fraught with problems. A fair way to do it would be like something first come first served basis, or on the basis of whoever, by booking or whatever, if it comes to that you have limited number of places and more of your congregants are wanting to attend. So it's something, it is not business as usual. This is what we need to understand. It is not business. Once our Masajid is closed, it's not business as usual. May not be so for many months to come. So therefore,
can I put this question to you? There has been some discussion about insurance and Masajid approaching their insurance companies and sort of bringing to them this question about the fact that we are in the process of opening up our Masajid and clearly recognizing there are certain risks. Now, let's say potentially, I'm just talking about hypothetical cases. Let's say, Allah forbid, that anything like this does happen. Let's say, for example, somebody was to attend the masjid on the basis of the fact that the masjid has opened and recognizing that there are certain conditions that have been presented to these masajid that they should adhere to mitigate the risks. This person attends the masjid, ends up with COVID-19. Question is whether it was from the masjid or not. That's a separate discussion. But let's say it was, and unfortunately they either ended up very unwell in intensive care, or they even died. Now, are the masajid liable in this instance? Is this something that we need to think about in terms of insurance, or is this something that is just hypothetical? It's not something that is of any major concern.
Well, it is a huge concern, no doubt about that, and any mosque's action will affect other mosques' actions as well, especially in the local area when you have a few mosques next to each other and taking different measures and different actions. And this is really a huge concern for us. Therefore, we need to look at it in the national basis, in the regional basis, and in the local basis. In terms of insurance, I think even the insurance didn't think about it, and now they are putting something in place in terms of these sort of issues, because it wasn't there a few months ago. and this is something new for everybody. We need to wait until we see the insurance guidance on that, and what they're going to put to cover these sort of things if this happen, because we are not talking about mosques only. It might happen in churches, in synagogues, in temples, and other places, and I think this will be about the places of worship. But my really concern is about how we as mosques work together on this, because as I said, imagine there is three, for example, in my local area in Finsbury Park, we have about 3 mosques next to each other. If I, as Finsbury Park Mosque, I take measures separately than the other mosques, and other mosques contradict with my measures. For example, let's say opening hours. Are we gonna open like half an hour before the Jama'ah and close after half an hour? Or if I take that decision and the other mosque decided, no, we will keep the mosque open for the whole day as normal, this will have a huge confusion among our communities, because the local community don't pray only on one mosque. They go to different mosques in their local area. And when they see different measures and different actions taken by different mosques, this will make a confusion, and it will be very difficult to change the mindset of our community and educate them to follow the rules in the mosque and follow the instruction. And this will have a huge problem, because people in that way, they won't take these rules seriously, and problems and tension start. Therefore, it's very important for us as mosques, and I advise all mosques, the council of mosques in the region area, or the local mosque in the same area, to sit down together. We still have a month or 5 weeks until we open our mosques, if plan goes as it is. So we still have time. I know that every mosque has got their own as well, in their own situation. Like, for example, the size of the mosques, the locality of the mosque, the fire exits, and so on. All these, the capacity of the mosque, all these will need to take it into consideration. But there is certain elements which we can agree as local mosque, so everybody, wherever they go, they can see these sort of things. For example, wudu area. Toilet area, are we going to open it or leave it closed? Even women hall. I mean, I know not all mosques can accommodate women, but for these mosques who accommodate sisters, sorry, are we gonna allow sisters to come back to the mosque? Which I think we should. We should take the same measures as we take it for the brothers, to take it for the sisters as well. Jum'ah, are we gonna have 1 Jum'ah, or are we gonna have 2 or 3? Because my mosque capacity is 2,000 people. Probably now I won't be able to take even 50 or 40%. So I probably need at least 2 Jum'ahs during. How are we gonna deal with this? All these questions, really, we need to sit down and start having this conversation and discussion about it. Otherwise, when the time comes, sorry, then we will have a huge problem in dealing with this matter if we are not prepared for it. The online training for our staff and for our trustees, for our management, for our volunteers, which now they are more than important than ever, the volunteers, because as you know, we need a lot of volunteers to help us dealing with this matter. We need a manpower as mosque to deal with these new things happening. We cannot go and employ more people because we don't have the ability, the financial ability. We are in a financial crisis as mosques in general. The congregation will be less than half who will come to the mosque, and this will reduce the income which we all rely on. And this is another issue which we need to look at it, how we can raise and fundraise for our mosques in a proper. Our mosques deserve to have a financial stability, actually, as mosques, and this is a huge challenge and huge difficulties which we are going to face. So all these questions we need really to start putting on the table and start finding answers. Of course, I'm not saying we will find answers for every question and for every things, but by time when we go, inshallah ta'ala, I'm sure the community will understand the measures the mosque take. But the most important things for us as a staff, as volunteers, as management, as trustees, to educate ourselves through online about, for example, medical, legal, logistic aspects, which include new capacity, risk assessments, safety officers, new equipment and measures we are going to take in our mosques, and training is very important, is quite essential right now.
We're going to talk about this now. I'm very vehement about coming up with solutions here. So what I'm going to do is, and I'm glad that I've done this, I've put this presentation together. If you look at the presentation, you'll see there. So as individual masajid, because I know there's many people on who are either running masajid or they're committee members of masajid today, and there'll be people who are watching this video webinar later on. The question that you need to really ask yourself from our discussion so far is, are you ready to protect the staff and worshippers at the high risk for severe illness? Okay, so are you ready for this? And for you to, clearly recognize that you are ready, it requires that you have a work plan. Do you have a work plan? Have you got your members or your committee members of your masajid together, and you've designed a work plan using guidelines that you've got from your local government? Okay, so that's the first thing. Number two, have you trained your staff? So is your staff trained? If they're not trained, they need to be trained, because this is quite important. They need to recognize, how do you disinfect a masjid? They need to recognize, how do you deal with individuals who may be coming into a masjid and are clearly not following appropriate guidelines. So these are things that you need to also recognize. The other thing is, do you have safety monitors? Safety monitors are individuals who would basically volunteer, and they would stand around certain locations in the masjid, maybe at the door, at the entrance, and just guide people, making sure that people are actually following these instructions, or even maintain and keep an eye on people, just to make sure that people are in essence following these particular guidelines that you have. The next is, are you ready to re-evaluate? And we're going to talk about the re-evaluation part in a short while, because that's very important. And then there's something about, are your muqtadis, your worshippers, are they aware of the conditions of attendance? So how are you going to get these messages out to the people who come regularly to your masajid? Are you going to announce this via some kind of streaming of some kind? Are you going to send this message out by through other individuals and inform people? Are you just going to make this message specific to a small group of people? Are you going to have a congregation and then say to people? Now, this is, again, could be quite messy. So this message needs to be very clearly out there to the public, in terms of, if you want to come to our masjid, then we highly recommend that you follow these guidelines, and these are the current guidelines that we want you to follow. The other thing is about insurance requirements. Now, I was talking to Shaykh Asim from BBSI, and he's mentioned to me that this is a real important issue. Mohammed Kozbar has mentioned this also, and that is the issue of, are we ready to deal with, the legal issues if anything goes wrong? Potentially, hopefully, inshallah, nothing like this should happen, or hopefully, inshallah, will not happen, but there is that possibility. It can. And we live in a very legal sort of quagmire of a climate today, and people are, can cause problems. So on that basis, are we legally, in a setup that we can say that, we've mitigated things, we've advised our worshippers to be in this way, and we cannot bear that additional responsibility of how people are behaving? Or do we need certain guidelines from our council or regular local government body that can give us some kind of assurance that you will not be legally viable if you follow these particular protocols? Yeah, so there's something about that that needs to be considered. The next stage is about conditions for staff. So if you remember, going back here to this particular plan, are recommended health and safety actions in place? Now, if you are ready to open, yes, and you're clearly fulfilling that. If you're not, then you do not open to public, because you're basically putting people at risk. If you are ready, then the question is, are recommended health and safety actions in place? So promoting healthy hygiene practices, such as hand washing, staff worshippers wearing a cloth face covering, are these feasible? Are you able to do this? Do you have them available at the masjid? These are things that you need to talk about. Intensity of cleaning, sanitization, disinfection, making sure you're ventilating the prayer area, so opening up your windows, making sure the doors are always open so that people are not handling the door handles, because that's a source of infection. Also encouraging social distancing and spacing during the prayer, minimum time in masjid, no physical greeting, limiting attendee sizes, restricting shared spaces. These are the kind of things that you will need to monitor, and also ensuring that the staff are regularly trained, as well as you are informing worshippers about some of these issues. So going back to some of these points here, there's something about risk profiling, recognizing high-risk staff. So, you know, when you have people who are going to play a role, an active role in the masjid, in terms of monitoring others in the masjid, or the imam in particular. So this goes, I'll bring this to Mufti Zubair. In terms of some of our masajid, you know, we have imams who may have chronic illnesses, you know, like diabetes, the heart disease, or, you know, clearly at older age. So clearly these kind of imams, we would advise probably, you know, to take caution more so, or even not even do imam at that particular time. Are there any, I mean, these are some of the solutions that I've heard people mention, is having some kind of shielding around the imam. So what we're doing is we're protecting the imam from the rest of the gathering. So we have a separate entrance, for example, in the masjid for, you know, the imam, or, you know, the people like the muezzin or whatever. Screening the imam or putting the imam in a separate room. Is there any limitations or restrictions from the Shariah perspective in what we can do in regards to that? Do we have limitations to that? Can we have the imam in a separate room, for example? I think Mufti Zubair, have we still got you here?
My apologies. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Right, this area is going to be very, very difficult for us, and I think we need to change our mindset. We need to adjust and do things differently now. Okay, for example, you have an imam who's elderly and probably at risk due to comorbidities. Then one suggestion that you have done is, okay, maybe have a screen around him, but it's not only at that particular time. It's not on a screen around him would be when people are getting too close. I mean, the imam could be, for example, 2 steps away from the rest of the congregation. That wouldn't be an issue. It's not just about the physical distancing. It's about touching. For example, you mentioned door handles. What about if it's a fire door? How do you keep a fire door open? You know, touch points, things, the microphone, etc., etc. All of these are ways which could transmit risk. So for me, if somebody is, for example, is in a category where they are at risk and the government has told them you need to be isolated for 40 weeks, that person should, the imam of that type should not be asked to come to the masjid and, you know, lead the prayers. His you know, services should be utilized online from home in terms of sermons, etc., in terms of the bayanat, in terms of other, you know, other reminders, etc. That's what we should do. And the masjid should have the capacity and, you know, to keep the imam in post, but use him differently. You need to think differently, and then get a replacement either voluntarily or on a paid purpose for that, for the imam to do this. So I was saying it's something that we, as a community, are going to have to think of differently. We're going to have to make allowances, and if you have an imam, or even if you have a, I mean, this is going to be the trickiest thing, because the majority of the people that frequent our 5 daily prayers tend to be those that are at risk, tend to be those that are of an older age, who we may be asking to stay at home. So, you know, and then you have here self-check or screen for symptoms, signs of COVID-19, temperature check. For me, there's an issue of with regards to what gives me the right as a private individual to check the temperature of another private individual. You know, the questions of autonomy over here. So I think this idea of risk profiling, it can be advisory, but can you say that you have to follow this? I'm not so sure that you can do that.
So it's a question of feasibility and how, you know, whether this can be implemented.
And also, you may, highly, those masajid that are very highly tuned with the whole thing surrounding COVID-19 may be able to implement something like this.
Right. Yeah.
Majority of our committees are not.
Yes.
And sometimes you find a lot of our committees tend to be people who maybe not that well educated. There were those people that started the Masajid back in the 70s and 80s, and because they were the ones that did it, and it was only recently that the younger, more educated part of our community are now beginning to join the committee. So that understanding may still not be there. So while it may be different, for example, for Brother Mohammed Kozbar in London, in Finsbury Park, that might not be translated for so many of the Masajid in Bradford. And so there are huge challenges here. And the more we talk about these things, the more and Alhamdulillah, I can say I would echo Brother Mohammed Kozbar's earlier comments that our community has done fantastic. We have been ahead of the curve. We have been leading the way in this. And whilst we have seen our non-Muslim colleagues maybe enjoying the beaches, we have tended to be still restrictive in what we have done. And so that is something we need to congratulate them for. Up and down the country, the looking after neighbors said that the things that have gone on, and I have seen a lot of work that has been nationally, for example, by the MCB and local mosque councils with their local council about discussing the issues in Leicester, in Bolton, in Bradford, all over the place. I've seen this happen. So things are happening. Things are happening. But these things that are happening need to be more available for others. Not everybody is lucky to be able to have these relationships with the local council, with the police, and have these structures. Not everybody is able to do that. So if we can have these made available, and so that those that want to benefit from this are able to do so, even if they don't have the expertise.
Can I just add one or two other points? I think they're quite important. I was approached by somebody not too long ago, and it's a very valid point, actually. This individual who is a member of a committee of a masjid, and one of the points that he was raising is that he was saying that it makes my job a lot easier when the government is clearly stating that masajid should be closed, and there should be no gatherings bigger than, let's say, so many people, or it should be just gatherings of people who live in the same home. Because on that basis, I don't have my worshippers, especially those who can be quite uptight about the situation, digging at me and causing a lot of problems for me. So there's something about that. If these restrictions are lifted, then the burden starts sitting on the people who run these masajid. It can be quite problematic for them, because then you're going to have people who are going to be saying, why are you not doing it? The government's allowing it, etc., etc., etc. And it becomes very difficult for them. And people don't always understand the fact that you have to mitigate these risks using these risk profiling, social distancing, and hygiene measures. So this is a very important point. The other thing that that's been mentioned here, if you see this, especially on hygiene measures, is things, for example, like all the worshippers bringing their own prayer mats. Otherwise, you're going to have problems there, because you're having a floor that's clearly being used by a number of different people, and that is a source of infection in itself. Also bringing shoe bags or bags that they can put their shoes in and then clearly place it, and having face covering to reduce that risk further. Now, the question arises in terms of this also. This is something that we're getting from certain governments of non-Muslim countries, mainly countries like UK, and that is that the wordings that they are using. So, for example, just goes to show there's a very Christian focus when it comes to opening places of worship, rather than what we would consider as a focus on Muslims. But generally, the kind of wording that is sometimes used is that we will allow places of worship to open for individual or personal prayer or worship, for acts of personal worship. Now, clearly, you can already tell from that, just from the statement, that this is making this is solely focused at sort of mainly Christian places of worship, and doesn't really identify with Muslims, because we don't have prayer like that in the masjid. Our prayers are in congregation. So if there's any kind of reason that we're going to open our masajid, it's mainly going to be for congregational prayers. We have 5 congregational prayers during the day. So clearly it needs to identify with what we consider as the utility of a masjid. So on that basis, just because our government is saying that the masajid, places of worship should be open, they can be open now, but only for private worship or individual worship. That is problematic for us, because that doesn't indicate that we can open up our masajid for congregational prayer, because clearly we only read in congregations when it comes to masajid. You know, so that is a problem in itself. Now, moving on to the last slide, and then I'm going to start opening this up to the audience, is conditions for worship. And we talked about this already. We talked about risk profiling, and we're limited in what we can do there. We talked about social distancing, and again, you know, depending on how well that is implemented, and also hygiene measures. We've also mentioned that as well. Now, what I want to do now is just open this up to the audience. So if there's anybody who wants to ask any particular specific questions related to any of this, or they have a statement they'd like to make related to this, please, you know, come forth. We're happy for you to come online and for you to ask your question. You can ask any of the panelists, or you can just address us in general, or you can, you know, mention something to the wider audience. Or if you have any solutions, because this is what it's about. It's about solutions. Recognizing that, and what I will do is towards the end, we will summarize what would be a good action. Remember, this is all getting recorded, and hopefully, inshallah, we'll have this all written down. So this will be available to all of you. So let's open this up to the audience generally.
If you allow me just to comment on what you said about the government giving instruction to mosques on this issue to make it easier for the community. I don't think this would work, because the government won't give a specific instruction to mosques. It will give a general instruction to places of worship, because otherwise they have to give for churches, they have to give for synagogues and temples and so on. I think that what they can give a general instruction or guidance, let me say, and then we need to put our. It is difficult. I agree with you, and I think I agree with you that we have to start educating our community to do things which they never done before, in terms of, as we said, the shoe bags, the face covering, the prayer mat, even the Quran. They can read from their own mobile instead of touching the Quran in the mosques, because this will pass. If anyone has got the virus, this will pass it to others. So all these sort of things has to be taken into consideration from now on. And I'm sure webinar like this will, inshallah ta'ala, help, you know, giving this guidance to the community, inshallah ta'ala.
Okay, so if there's anybody who wants to come online, if I can mention this to the Al-Balagh admin, if you just put that person online, inshallah, let them speak. In the meantime, what I will do is I'll just try to go through some of these questions that some of our audience has basically put to us. So there's a question here about healthcare professionals. Clearly, these are frontline staff. Anybody who's not frontline staff, then they're not at risk. So clearly, we have frontline staff, and frontline staff, what they do is they clearly see patients, well, potentially COVID-19 patients. So they are at risk. Now, the question arises, should we allow these individuals to come to the masjid, or should they, on their own autonomy, refrain from coming to the masjid when the masjid does open? So I suppose I could probably address that question. When you're on frontline, when you're a frontline staff, more than likely you will have PPE, so you will be quite well protected, and the risk that you are putting yourself under is probably no different to anybody else. If your PPE is clearly of sufficient sort of level that you are clearly protecting yourself well. Now, if you are at risk by seeing patients, then it would be your autonomy. So even if masajid are open and we are, let's say some masajid are limiting the number of people in the masajid, I suppose this is a question to Mufti Zubair. So in terms of our own individual duty to attend the masjid, let's say, for example, our masajid do open. And what our masajid are doing is they've decided that they're going to limit the number of people that can attend. So let's talk specifically about Jum'ah Salah. So let's say they are limiting this, so they're having a number of Jama'at in the day on Jum'ah, let's say 2 or 3 different Jama'ats going on. Is this wujub, is a liability on us? Is it mandatory that we should attend the masjid if that is happening? Or is that lifted? I mean, in terms of, can we still carry on reading Nafil Salah at home?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. If the masajid are open and are able to facilitate for the Jummah Salah, for example, then those on whom Jummah Salah is wajib, is fard, will have to attend Jummah Salah. Okay. and it would be on a duty of the masjid to facilitate it with, as you said, 2 or 3 Jummah Salah. So,
well, let's say, for example, they're limiting the number of people. So let's say, I mean, this is probably going to happen, isn't it? In time, what's going to happen is the Masajid are going to say, we can't cater for any more because we are still having this element of social distancing. It's going to happen, inevitable, whether we like it or not. It's going to probably happen. And certain Masajid are going to limit it. So you're going to have many limited places. It's going to be very difficult to attend a masjid, on that basis. Does that liability still stand? I mean, there'll be an element of a mashaqqa and a hardship for you to attend a masjid.
I think if you are unable to access a masjid, it still will be possible for you to do Jummah Salah outside of a masjid, maybe in your own back garden. In fact, with the guidelines changing on the 1st of June, and with up to 6 people being able, from different households, being able to come together outside,
Right.
this raises the question of whether a Jummah Salah becomes obligated now in your back garden,
Okay.
or in the masjid car park.
Right.
Which I can't see why not.
So, okay.
Jummah
So
is now
that's
able to be done, and you can get different households coming together. So even if you don't have the 4 in the same household, you are able to up to 6 people, or even in the local park, you can do it.
Right. So, I mean, what we've been saying for some time now, during COVID-19 sort of scenario, is that, it's better for you to just read Nafal Salah at home. Dhuhr Salah at home for Jummah. Now, the question arises because the group can be increased in size, and clearly we're recognizing this is even between neighbors who are neighbors of this, consecutive neighbors. So, in other words, you're having gardens which are in line with each other. You can potentially read Jummah together.
What I would say is, if you are unable to access the masajid, then okay, fine. You can do it individually. Otherwise, on a normal basis, we don't have a history of if you miss Jummah, then okay, do Salah, do Jummah at home. In general, within the Hanafi school specifically, we don't have that. We don't have a history of that. People, I missed my Jummah, let's do Jummah at home. So we don't have that kind of thing. Rather, you have.
There are madhab differences on that, aren't there?
There are madhab differences, yes. But in the majority within this country would be following the Hanafi school. So I would say that previously the fact that the whole spirit of Jummah is not for 2-3 people to do Jummah separately. It's about Jummah comes from words of gathering, getting together. The whole idea is for the whole community, where for other prayers they may be doing small congregations, but for Jummah they all come together. And so then to have all of that at home it doesn't really fit with the spirit of what Jummah is all about. So if the people did Dhuhr here, but now it's a case of where the masajid are open, and the only reason you are not able to access the masjid is because there were 3 Jummah Salat, 150 people were catered for, they can't do any more. That should not stop you from being able to do Jummah elsewhere and making other provisions. If other provisions can be made, you should make them, and if they can't be made, okay, then you do Dhuhr.
Okay. Now, there's another question regarding our madrasa, so our makatib and the madaris. Now, I can address that question. I think that's quite clear-cut. Now, because we see our masajid as a necessity, it's an act of necessity that we need to open. It's wajib for us to have our masajid open, unless clearly the situation that we're in at the moment. Now, when it comes to madaris and makatib, that is something that it's not wajib for us to do that on site. We can do that online. So there is an alternative solution to that. So in other words, from that particular perspective, why put yourself at such risk when clearly you can deal with that? Probably not to the same degree, but you can do it online. So on that basis, with the issue regarding masajid and makatib, even government guidelines would not allow for that at this stage in the UK. I don't know about other countries, but generally speaking, you would have to still continue your makatib and your madaris online. So we're talking specifically about masajid because that's a separate issue. You can't mitigate those risks to that degree when something is not necessary for you to do on site and quite easily can be dealt with online. So they would continue, madaris and masajid would continue. The UK government is seeing schools as a priority on the basis more so for nurseries and early schooling because of frontline staff. So these staff who are key staff, key workers, for them to go back into work they see that it's necessary for them to allow nurseries to open, etc. And that is one of the main reasons why. And now they're expanding that to schools. Now, I know there's a big discussion going on amongst some of the bodies that deal with, regulatory bodies that deal with schools, in terms of how do they open, what's the feasibility. Same kind of conversations that we're having. They're having those same kind of conversations in terms of opening schools. How do we socially distance in schools? How do we maintain hygiene? These are kids. Kids don't always follow guidelines. You know, they'll do whatever they want to do. So, you know, how do we maintain this? So there's a lot of issues, even in terms of schools opening at the right time. So, you know, we think we've got a headache trying to decide on opening our Masajid. The same things, kind of discussions that are happening in schools. The next, another question is, if the Masajid are open and the congregational prayers are being held, is it permissible to not go even when the individual is young and healthy, out of fear of contracting the virus? Now, I'll put this to Mufti Sahib. So Mufti Zubair, if you're not
okay
from your health, you know,
there are two things here. One is the requirement to pray in obligation, and one in congregation, and one thing to do in the masjid. So it is wajib to pray in congregation if that is at all possible. So that can even happen outside of the masajid as well. Okay, so if somebody has truly has a fear, and that personally that they have the fear that I will contract the virus or I am at risk, etc., then khawf min al-marad is also a reason for one not to attend the masjid for congregational prayer. However, you know, it has to be, it has to be reasonable. It shouldn't be on a whim, or just where the chances are very low. No, a person has a reasonable fear that this is something that might happen, which, to be honest, depending on how our congregants attend the masjid, how careful they are, this is a real concern. Because if we don't do things properly, then we could see spikes because of masajid. So yes, it can be a real concern. So if somebody does have this concern, they don't have to attend congregational prayer.
Okay, I just want to mention another point, and because Dr. Munir is not here, I'll speak on his behalf for somebody who's read into this and talked to one or two individuals on this issue. And that is the issue of R numbers. And this is something that's really important for us to understand. So R numbers is, in essence, a measure of the transmission rate. Okay, so if the transmission rate is high within a certain locality, then there is a greater risk of people suffering as a result of COVID-19. So this is called the R number. And this is something what the Prime Minister UK was basically talking about. So the R number, in essence, varies in different locations up and down the country, and they can also clearly vary in different locations in different countries. Now, we have to recognize that there can be quite a significant difference in the R number of London compared to, for example, North Yorkshire in England. So the current figures are suggesting that the transmission rate, or the R number, in Yorkshire, for example, is higher than it is in London. In fact, in London, it's decreasing. In Yorkshire, it's increasing. Now, what does that actually mean? That means that the transmission rate is actually increasing in the northern part of England relative to south. So when the government does talk about, some of these measures and some of these guidelines and opening up some of these, facilities and institutes. In essence, my personal take on this is a lot of that seems to be focused around what's happening down south, and not as much is being paid attention to is what's actually happening up north. So the risk up north exists; it's very real, north of England, that I'm saying, relative to what it is down south. And in fact, for somebody who's working in a practice, we're seeing a lot more cases of COVID-19 now than I've seen over the last 2 months. So the numbers are increasing quite a lot. And that isn't to say, now the question now arises is what about the number of deaths? Taking into consideration that when the R number increases in a particular locality, that doesn't mean that the death rates are also increased at the same time. But usually death rates start happening 2 to 3 weeks after that. So we can't be complacent about this. We can't sort of drop things and say, right, okay, fair enough. You know, the government's saying this, and therefore, you know, we don't need to be concerned about this, because you need to now take into consideration which locality you're in and what is the transmission rate within your locality. Now, places like London and Birmingham have clearly had this 3 weeks in advance relative to what's actually happening in north of England, for example. And this would also apply in your own country for those of you who are, you know, watching and listening from abroad, from elsewhere around the world. You need to adhere to the guidelines of not necessarily nationally in the country that you're in, but also locally. What is your local, you know, administration, your council, your government saying in terms of how soon you should be adhering or thinking about you know, undoing the lockdown in your masajid. This is a very, very important point that we need to really still recognize. I know people have addressed this before, but not to the degree that, and I wanted Dr. Munir to talk about this, but inshallah he's not here, so I'll sort of mention that myself. Now,
just add, Doctor, when initially we were going to do this webinar, I noticed some figures then, and then London was 0.4, the R rate was 0.4 in London and 0.8 in Yorkshire.
yes.
And if you look at that, means for every 10 people that have COVID-19, 8 more people, they'll pass it on to 8 more people in Yorkshire. And whether it's in London, they'll pass it on to 4 more people.
Yeah.
Now, this is when, before the relaxation of the current, you know, before the 1st of June, this was on the 17th of March, on 17th of May, where the restrictions were much tighter. Now that the restrictions have loosened, this will raise the R rate. It's not like it's going to decrease, it will raise it. How, and the government just looking at how much is tolerable for us, how much can we manage, etc. It's accepting that there will be a, you know, a COVID-19 transmission and death, but how much is tolerable? So the R rate just reflects really the tolerable rate of the transmission.
Yeah. Okay. Just looking again at if there's anybody who wants to say anything. I know there's, okay, let's move to Zahir Shabir. Zahir Shabir. Okay, I'm going to allow you to talk now. You can talk. So those of you who got your hands up, inshallah, I'm going to put you online. So Zahir Shabir. Okay, I think maybe we lost you. Okay, no worries.
No, can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Is that
okay,
Zahir?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Really great that we're having this conversation. Very important indeed for all the mosques. And I couldn't agree more. You know, we need to begin this conversation straight away because we have got less time in the way that we do things, in the way that we need to get this out. The messaging, 4 or 5 weeks might still seem short. One thing very importantly, there's a task group now set up by the government. The conversations that we're having on this webinar and many of the conversations going on with all other credible organizations too, they either need to link into that task group, so because ultimately that they will be making a decision in what places of worship opening look like. So I hope that whatever conversation we have here with the discussion,
can I ask you, this task group that you're talking about, which is in consultation with the government, are you talking about the BBSI?
no, the task group with the government on places of worship.
All right, okay. Right.
All right, because it's no point us having a separate conversation when a government-based decision from this task group will be or could be wholly different. So I feel that we should be linking up with that task group, letting them know that these conversations are taking place, and this will benefit them because it's how we feel at the same time.
Just to address your point, there is a government consultation that's going on at the current moment. And the organization that currently is involved in that is the British, I'm talking specifically about the UK here. So the British Imams and Scholars sort of organization. So they've got representation of Shaykh Asim, I think, who's actually sitting and representing views from the Muslim community on that particular panel. So I've liaised with him, so I'm sort of ensuring that we're getting up-to-date sort of information. But I think there's no harm in people having discussions on many different platforms. I don't see any issue with that. I think people can talk about this. The more people start talking about this, the more you know, their messages will go out there. And I don't think anybody's going to go, you know, out of the general guidelines that will come out. And there'll be certain guidelines that will be out there. There'll be some variations in some of those guidelines. There will be some instructions in terms from the government. I think they'll be quite broad. They won't be very specific to the Muslim community, as Mohammed Kozbar mentioned earlier on. And I think it will be for us to make decisions in terms of how we're going to enact those. And that may be not necessarily nationally, it may even be locally. So, you know, it may be about councils for mosques engaging with their local council and making those kind of decisions. So, inshallah, you know, I don't see any harm in people having many different discussions.
Dr. Saab, can I just add? As a member of BBCI, Dr. Asim Yusuf has been asked to represent the Muslim community.
Yeah.
And Dr. Asim himself has asked other people to come forward and liaise with him and communicate with him. So I think we should encourage that. There is a single platform there, but we should encourage that other people can also get involved as well.
Mobeen, we've got Mobeen here. Do you want to come online?
Assalamu alaikum. Can you guys hear me?
Wa alaikum salam. We can, yeah.
Okay, quick question. So schools are opening on the 1st of June. Some madaris, some makatib are using that rationale, saying if the schools are opening, then we should open as well. My understanding is that most of the rationale for the government opening schools is so that it supplies childcare for parents, and then they can go out to work, get the economy going again. I don't think we can use that same rationale to open up the maktab and the madrasa. What advice is there to the madrasas and maktab? I think personally they're being a bit too hasty, trying to extrapolate the ruling or the guidance on schools to their institutes.
Okay. Mohammed Kozbar, do you want to answer that?
Well, it is a very good question. Actually, there is an issue with opening our schools in the near future. First of all, I can say that usually during the summer, our school closed. I mean, from Ramadan, we stop our schools and we start again. I'm talking about the weekend school and weekday schools in the afternoon after the normal schooling. So mainly, most of the mosques close these schools during this period between Ramadan, May, June until September, October. So we still have three to 4 months to prepare for that. And I would advise that during this period, if schools will open to carry on what is left from the previous year, I think it would be better to do it online. And then we can prepare ourselves as mosques for the school to open from September. We need to look at all sorts of measures which we have to take to make sure that children, teachers and staff are really safe and they are not at risk, as it's been mentioned. And this is not an easy task to do, but I think it is quite important that we start working on that. So when we open our schools in September or October for the children to come back to the mosque, then we have this prepared. And also we have to take into consideration the size of our mosques. The mosques who can open schools for certain students, now they have to reconsider that, because they might have to reduce the number of the students and make sure that self-distancing is taken into consideration as well. And this, of course, will affect a lot of students, a lot of families, and also will affect the financial situation of mosques, because also mosques rely on school to have some sort of income in terms of fees and so on. So we started this conversation, and we have to speak to the teachers, to the staff, and make sure that they are on board on that, and put some sort of guidance actually. And I think national organizations like MCB, BBIS, and other national Muslim organizations, they need to as well help by putting something nationally for schools across the country.
Okay. Can
I just say something? The government guidance is quite clear that the rule with regards to the opening of schools does not apply to makatib and masajid. It's quite clear. So if anybody is reading from our masajid, makatib is reading into that they have opened schools so we can open, that is not correct. our makatib supplementary schools are known as out of school. I don't have the exact words from the out of school setting, and they have clearly said that this does not apply to them. So if you run a maktab, if you run a madrasa, which is not a full-blown madrasa with a school, etc., you cannot open.
I just can add what the community secretary Robert Jenrick said. He said places of worship. This in general, it's not about just school, but this general guidance. Places of worship will only be open when the government is confident that people can use these spaces safely and will not put themselves or others at risk. So this apply to the mosques, apply to schools, apply to everything, and therefore we need to prioritize our activities in the mosque. Some activities maybe will stop for a while, like sports, youth clubs, karate sessions, and so on, self-defensing sessions, weddings, lectures, and so on. This probably only in the next few months we will only focus on how we make our mosque deal with prayers, especially the Jama'ah prayers and Friday prayers. This is the main priority for us as mosques.
Okay, we'll take one more question from Ambreen, inshallah. So Ambreen, if you can speak. Okay, so right, let's just finish off with one or two questions, and inshallah then we'll finally finish off with one last final thing. So there's a question about let me have a look, because some of these questions are recurring. We've already answered some of these questions.
Also, there's a question about a consent form. So when you enter the masjid,
getting people to complete some kind of consent.
Sign a consent form, or to waive sort of liability of the masjid. I think that to answer that properly, you would probably need a lawyer. But I would not see that if the masjid has not done its due diligence, that they would be absolved of any responsibility. Even if you had a form signed by the individual, the masjid will still have to have its own due diligence. I will still have to have done what is required of them. Otherwise, they will be liable.
Okay, inshallah. Some of these questions have generally been answered indirectly. So I'm going to, because our time's run out, inshallah, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to finish on one final thing before we finish, inshallah. So this is, in essence, more an appeal than anything else to Masajid. Now, the Masajid are very, very important places for Muslims. They're a place where we convene, where we come together. They are the heart of the Muslim community. So on that basis, it's very, very important that we must protect our Masajid at all cost. And at the present moment, one of the biggest things that our Masajid are suffering from are some of the financial issues to keep sustained or keep maintained. Now, sometimes that can vary from different Masajid. Some Masajid have a very strong community who can quite regularly, provide certain funds to the masjid on a regular basis. And then there are others, especially those Masajid that are small, they're in, at the end of a street maybe, or even very large Masajid that have very high costs. Now, on that basis, and I'll bring the two panelists on board as well in terms of get some kind of idea about what their thoughts are on this. But one thing that is really, really important, we need a plan in terms of how we fund our Masajid. I know some Masajid are looking at doing this online. So I'm going to first turn to Mohammed Kozbar. I mean, what advice would you give to Masajid who are really struggling at the moment? And there are many who are struggling at the moment. There are many Masajid who are struggling at the moment financially to keep themselves maintained. What advice would you give?
Well, unfortunately, many of our mosques will be badly affected by what's happened, and many of these mosques rely after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the congregation who come to the mosque and give money on the boxes and so on. And I'm sure with more than half of the congregation able to attend the mosque on a daily basis, and on Friday they will lose a quite substantial amount of donation to cover the expenses. Therefore, I think that we have to be creative. We have to start thinking outside the box, and we have to start for those mosques who usually don't apply for funds from the local government, from councils, to cover some of their activities, like community activities and projects, youth projects, faith interfaith projects, and so on. They should start considering applying for that for the local community, and I'm sure the local community, the local council will take this into consideration because of the situation, and it will open the door for future funding from the local councils, and as well from the government. Even the mayor of London, they have some funds which they can help with. This one thing. The other thing, we spoke about the online, which is quite effective, by the way. During Ramadan, alhamdulillah, a lot of mosques fundraised online, and they managed to raise quite a substantial amount of money. But also, we need to start thinking about, for example, standing orders and direct debits, which have some sort of sustainable income to the mosques. When someone gives £5 or £10 per month, within a year, it's £120. And imagine if we have like 200, 300 or 500 people doing that, this will give some sort of sustainable income to the mosques. Therefore, we need to think, because we cannot only now rely on the people who come on the door and give this money. And we have to as well to remember that many of our congregation and stakeholders are struggling. Many of them, they lost their jobs. They are unemployed because of the current situations, and they won't give as they used to give before. Therefore, we need to start thinking about applying for projects from local governments, from the government, from other charities who give funds and grants for certain activities and projects, and also on online and standing orders and direct debit.
Mufti Zubair, anything you would like to add?
Yes, I would echo what Brother Kozbar has said. I would say we need to look at this not as a problem, but as an opportunity. And like I said earlier, we need to, it's not business as usual, we need to change our mindset. There are certain initiatives that I'm aware of, as for example, in Bradford, the local Bradford Council of Mosques, they announced an initiative for £100,000 fund to support our local masjids. So maybe something like that, where we can fundraise collectively to help those masajid that don't have the infrastructure to be able to do it. It's okay saying, okay, you can do this, you can do that, but sometimes the masjid may not have the infrastructure, the individuals that run the masjid or are closely connected to the masjid, for them to be able to do that. So kind of national. Also, our Muslim charities are also available there for some help as well. So all of these should be accessed. It's a matter of not waiting for things to happen, but doing things differently. For example, online, fundraising, and it's a bit difficult when inshallah the lockdown is eased further, trying to knock on doors or get into contact or ring around, etc. People that potentially will, inshallah, and inshallah, if there are those individuals amongst us who have suffered and are less able, there will also be those for whom now is the opportunity to step forward and who are more able, inshallah, to fund. And inshallah, we will find that if we, tawakkal Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will provide you forms of revenue you will never have imagined, inshallah. So
just to agree, I agree with the Mufti Zubair on terms of charities. Our local charities, the UK charities, actually the mosque gave a lot during the past for these charities, and it is the time for them to pay back these struggling mosques. I'm talking about the mosques who are really struggling financially, by investing in these mosques. And it's the time to invest within our Muslim community in the UK at the moment, because for the long term, this is a strategical approach and strategical measures which we have to take. Because if we invest in our mosque and make them strong institutions, then they will pay this back in the future, inshallah ta'ala. So I hope that the Muslim charities, we know quite big charities in the UK, and they've got a substantial amount of money. They can give some sort of percentage from this money to invest it within the Muslim community, and especially the mosques, inshallah. And let's not forget that mosque will be losing as well a lot of income from hiring their halls and their facilities and so on. This will be stopped. I mean, we can't. We are struggling bringing people to pray at the moment. How are we going to manage it? So the other things will not be a priority and will stop. And this is as well will affect the mosque financially. So we need to really start thinking outside the box, inshallah ta'ala.
Okay, just to summarize the webinar today, inshallah. In essence, depending on where you are around the world, you need to follow the national guidelines of your government or your administration in terms of how soon your masajid can start slowly and gradually open. Now, more specifically to the UK, clearly at this stage, we are still not ready. There are certain implications of this in terms of you may have guidelines, and most likely, especially in the Western world, the guidelines are going to be very broad, very non-specific, and probably will not address directly the Muslim community in terms of our masajid. So it becomes the role of those people, leaders within our communities, to engage with these government bodies more locally as well as nationally, and actually think about plans in terms of how those masajid will gradually start opening. So this is very important. At the present moment, that looks like it's not going to be happening. Possibly in July, we may be seeing some kind of instructions of certain masajid may be opening. But even then, as masajid, they have their own personal responsibility to ensure that they can adhere to those strict guidelines, both from a Shariah perspective, in the sense that it's important that we must protect our worshippers, and also from our governmental perspective in terms of we should abide by the advice that our government is giving us, because especially if it's scientific and it's clearly addressing the bigger picture nationally. So on that basis, we should not just fall prey to certain statements that have been stated by our administration or our government that's addressing other institutes like schools, and think on that basis that we should open our madaris or makatib. Rather, we should wait until our own leaders within our communities are saying it's okay now to open it. Now, the other thing that's very, very important, we need to also address our own personal masajid, and we have a responsibility in terms of ensuring that we fulfill our guidelines. There are some clear instructions that we've given and some kind of broad guidelines in some of the presentation that we've had today. And there are many guidelines out there. I think MCB have their own guidelines as well, which is very in line with this, because this is drawn up from all those guidelines. So please do look at those guidelines, follow those guidelines. If it comes to that stage. Inshallah, what we will do is we'll be having another webinar in the next coming weeks and give you more of an update about how circumstances may have changed. Also, stay safe, keep to the guidelines at home, and also recognizing something that Mufti Zubair mentioned earlier on, there are certain acts which become mandatory upon us in terms of acts of worship. And if you can read in Jama'ah, then you should stick to Jama'ah as much as possible with limited numbers in your own homes. And that's something that you should try to do as much as possible. And as the government starts addressing this issue about that you can have larger gatherings of 6 or even more over time, then you should also look at that in terms of practical means and how you can do that at home. So even if you could read Jum'ah in your back garden, for example, then that is a possibility if those numbers increase in terms of how many people can read in a gathering. Now, having said that, one last thing which we talked about was our masajid. Our masajid are very, very important institutes which we should spiritually connect with, as well as financially support. So it's very, very important for those masajid who have the capacity to do this to go out online and basically work with their local community to have that financial support from those regular worshippers that attend their masajid. Other than that, then we have many Muslim charities who do some excellent work home and abroad. So it's an appeal to them that it's time that you guys turned around and you started you know, going to your regular clients who actually donate to many different charity programs that you have, and start really building on forming a stream that funds a lot of those masajid that are really struggling at the moment, inshallah. So jazakumullah khair. I want to thank the panelists. Alhamdulillah, it's been very useful. Hopefully you found a lot of benefit in what's been said. Please make dua for the Muslim Ummah, and inshallah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it easy for us to open up our masajid so that we can go back to, you know, on-site worshipping in our masajid, alhamdulillah. And just one last final thing, that please make dua for Al-Balagh Academy. Alhamdulillah, we've been trying to maintain this regularly to keep people updated, and you know, even our staff, you know, alhamdulillah, they've been putting a lot of work behind closed doors into, you know, in terms of getting things running. And unfortunately, we've even had people amongst our team who have become unwell, so make dua for them, Allah give them shifa. Jazakumullah khair for attending. Inshallah, hopefully we'll continue, and if there's any other queries that you have, please don't hesitate to contact us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.